Thanks for tuning in to Everything Catholic again, and this video is going to be a little bit long, but I particularly learned a lot from this one personally. And for this one, it's not going to be any compilation format that I usually share, but still, just like with every other video, I hope all of you are going to learn a lot from this one. Listen to this.
The ancient Greek classic scholars, as well as the patristic, scholastic, and contemporary theologians, which include renowned cardinals, bishops, and even fathers. With regard to the ancient Greek scholars, the classic scholars, we first come across a pair that's reported in St. Hippolytus of Rome's letters. Hippolytus was from the 3rd century, and he referred to Leucippus, as well as the famous Epicurus, who are respectively from the 5th century and 3rd century BC, both of whom were atomists. Atomists were those who, in the Greek world, maintain that all that exists in the cosmos is atoms and void, and that these atoms cluster and form different shapes, positions, arrangements, and give rise to various macroscopic substances, even the possibility of rational substances, meaning rational life. And for example, Epicurus noted that extraterrestrial inhabitants may exist, as well as plants and other organisms in other worlds. Now that's the key word. They use the expression worlds now. Of course, they spoke Greek, I'm using English, but in Greek, the word world, in the writings of these first atomists that address the possibility of other worlds and the possibility of life therein that could be rational, in some parts at least, did not mean world as we understand it today. World did not mean the solar system. It meant a series of solar systems, a series of, you may call them cosmoi or universes, in which there was the possibility of organisms, both irrational and rational. And Epicurus was succeeded in the ancient Greek classic scholar world by Aristotle, who was also, like Leucippus and Epicurus, a pagan philosopher. Most people don't realize that Aristotle did not believe in a personal God. There's no evidence in his writings to suggest that. He was one who supported the idea that there was a prime mover throughout the universe, and this prime mover gave rise to successive motions, which we refer to today as inertia in physics. And therefore, he concluded that since there's only one prime mover, which is an impersonal force in the universe, keeping things in motion, there could only be one effect of that prime mover, which is one prime effect result, and therefore only one world or one cosmos or one universe. Now, this argument of Aristotle, even though it would be picked up by Aquinas, was contested later on in succeeding centuries by Catholic theologians. In brief, some of them are the Franciscan friar from Oxford, Father William of Ockham, as well as Father John Buridan, Father Joseph Pole, and Bishop Nicholas Oresme. And these were scholars from respectively the 13th to the 14th centuries. And they maintain that God does not limit his power to human thought. In other words, God's power is limitless. And this is reflected actually in the angel Gabriel's salutation to Mary when he told her that nothing is impossible with God. And this position of these scholastic thinkers and even neo-scholastic thinkers was kind of confirmed by the 13th century Bishop Etienne Tempier, who issued a condemnation against those who maintained that God could only create one world. This is known as the famous 1277 condemnation, in which Bishop Etienne Tempier stated, and I'm going to quote to you from this Article 34 of his condemnation of 1277, that it is an excommunicable offense to hold, in quotes, that the first cause, that is God, the first mover, which is God, could not make several worlds, unquote. Now, this is huge, because this ecclesiastical statement from a bishop of Paris opened up the ecclesial doors to the theological acceptance of the reality of other worlds throughout the cosmos, and therefore the possibility of them even being inhabited. So this is the beginning of the Catholic Church's admission of the possibility of other worlds and other life that may occupy them. Now, after Bishop Etienne in the 14th century, still rolling into the 15th century, came William Vorilong. And he was a French philosopher and theologian, and he was the first, this is important too, the first theologian to have raised the question of whether the plurality of worlds or universes or cosmoi may be reconciled with the incarnation and the redemption of Jesus Christ. And he replied in the affirmative. I'm going to quote to you from one of his works in which he states, in quotes, "If it be inquired whether a whole world is able to be made more perfect than this universe, I answer that not one world alone, but that infinite worlds more perfect than this one lie hid in the mind of God. If it be inquired whether individuals exist on that world, and whether they have sinned as Adam sinned, I answer no, for they would not exist in sin and did not spring from Adam." Now this is interesting because almost exactly 500 years later to this statement of William Vorilong, Saint Padre Pio Pietrelcina, a Franciscan friar, stated, in quotes, in response to a friar asking him if other rational beings exist on other planets, stated, "On other planets, other beings exist who did not sin and fall as we did." See the correlation between William Vorilong and Padre Pio? So Padre Pio's statement did not come out of nowhere. It was grounded in this history of Greek scholastic, philosophical, theological debate on the plurality of other worlds and the possibility of rational and irrational beings existing therein. William Vorilong states, "As to the question whether Christ, by dying on this earth, could redeem the inhabitants of another world, I answer that he is able to do so, even if the other worlds were infinite, but it would not be fitting for Christ to go to another world in order to die again." And this is the mainstream theological Catholic position in speculative theology. Christ incarnated himself only once for all eternity and redeemed mankind and the universe only once for all eternity. He didn't just redeem the world, he redeemed the cosmos. Paul even states this when he says that he is the firstborn of all creatures and that Christ's one incarnation, he reconciled, that's what he says, all things in heaven and on earth. Why in heaven? Why would he have to reconcile things in heaven? So you start to see the bigger picture here. Then after William Vorilong comes Nicholas of Kuza. He was a German Catholic cardinal, a philosopher and a theologian from the 15th century. And he stated in chapter 12, I'm going to quote it to you, of his most famous work, De Docta Ignorantia, which is on or of learned ignorance. He states as follows: "Life, as it exists on earth in the form of men, animals, and plants, is to be found, let us suppose, in higher forms, in solar and stellar regions. Rather than think that so many stars and parts of the heavens are uninhabited, we will suppose," we meaning the cardinal representing the church, "that in every region there are inhabitants, differing in nature by rank, all owing their origin to God. Even if inhabitants of another kind should exist in other stars, it seems inconceivable that anything more noble and perfect could be found than the intellectual nature that exists here on earth." Let me repeat this. This is important because this cardinal, Nicholas of Cusa, is stating that even though there are higher forms in other regions of the universe, we, the lowest form of rational life, are the most noble. He states again, "Even if inhabitants of another kind should exist in other stars, it seems inconceivable that anything more noble and perfect could be found than the intellectual nature that exists here on earth." Now, this is almost exactly what Jesus would tell Louisa 500 years later. So just as Padre Pio reiterated 500 years later what William Vorilong stated, likewise Jesus reiterates 500 years later what Nicholas of Kuza, the German cardinal, stated. And this quotation of our Lord to Louisa comes from volume 20, October 29th, 1926, which is as follows. Now, after I created everything, I formed man's human nature with my own creative hands. And just as I formed his bones, nerves, and heart, so I centralized in him my love. After I clothed him with flesh, forming as though the most beautiful statue that no other artisan could ever make, I looked at him and loved him, and with such uncontainable love that it overflowed, breathed on him, and I infused in him life. But we, the Most Holy Trinity, were not satisfied. In an excessive love, we wanted to endow him with an intellect, a memory, and a will that his creaturely capacity could contain. Thus, we enriched him with all the perfections of our divine being. The fullness of our divinity was wholly intent on loving man and pouring itself out into him. This comes right from Jesus to Louisa, buttressing what Cardinal Nicholas of Kuza stated, that even though there are more superior or advanced life forms in other parts of the universe, man is the most noble. Jesus also relates to Louisa in another passage dated February 28, 1919, from volume 22. Everything you see in creation was absolutely nothing compared to the creation of man. Oh, how many more beautiful heavens, stars, and suns did God extend in the created soul? What a variety of beauty and how much harmony! It is enough to say that God looked at created man and found him so beautiful that he fell in love with him. Jealous of this portent of his, God himself became the custodian and possessor of man and said, I have created everything for you. I give you dominion over everything. All is yours, and you will be all mine. He surpasses all created things in beauty, power, and light. So while Cardinal Nicholas of Kuza acknowledges that we, the lowest form of rational life in the universe, which is precisely why God incarnated himself in us, he raises the lowly to high places, surpass in nobility all other rational creatures, even the angels who are superior to us in intellectual prowess. Cardinal Nicholas Kuza affirms that the inhabitants of other planetary systems are by nature more spiritual than us. Those are his words, in quotes. They are more spiritual than us. And of course, we have other Catholic priests that have supported the possibility of extraterrestrial life throughout the cosmos, such as the 16th century priest was burned to the stake, Giordano Bruno. Now, I wish to go right to St. Hannibal di Francia, Luisa Picaretta's appointed confessor, spiritual director, and saint. Spiritual, also director of several other mystics, including Melanie Calvet, and the foundress of the Sisters of Divine Zeal, and so forth. He states, in the 9 p.m. hour of the Passion book that he had published in 4 editions, in this hour, the 9 p.m. hour, abandoned by his eternal Father, Jesus Christ suffered such a burning fire of love that he was able to destroy all conceivable and imaginable sins and inflame with his love all souls, even souls from millions and millions of worlds. Even souls from millions and millions of worlds, not just other worlds, millions of worlds. And the souls of those who would squander this love by choosing to remain eternally obstinate in their evil and choosing to go to hell. Now, this reference of St. Hannibal it's really inspired by Jesus' words to Louisa that are found in volume 11, October 29th, 1914, where he tells her, my will contains completely accomplished acts. One single act in my will is enough to create 1,000 worlds. Let me repeat that. One single act of my will is enough to create 1,000 worlds, perfect and complete. Now, if these worlds didn't exist, why would our Lord even say that?
Well, that is all for the video this time. Again, thank you so much for taking a little bit of your time to be here with us. Always remember that if ever you have any feedback or suggestion, please don't ever hesitate to let us know in the comments below.